Hello, and welcome to another episode of Perspectives from the Informed Perspective. We're Penny and Jenny, and if this is your first time tuning in, we're so glad you're here. This is the podcast where we explore what it means to build thoughtful, grounded communities shaped by our local lives, but enriched by ideas and experiences from around the world. For us, meaningful change starts with listening, really listening, especially to experiences that challenge or expand our own. Today, we are talking about youth engagement. We'll be speaking to two adults with extensive experience working with and alongside young people. And in a few weeks' time, we're giving the youth themselves the floor with an episode devoted entirely to youth voice. This is a topic that sits close to both of our hearts, and we cannot wait to get into it. So what do we mean by youth engagement? Simply put, the involvement of young people in the decisions, the conversations and matters that affect their lives and communities. Not consulted and ignored, not invited and then talked over, actually included. The difference between decisions made for young people and decisions made with them. That's the heart of it. But first, who even is the youth? It depends on who you ask. The UN says people between 15 to 24 years of age. The African Union stretches it to 35, and the WHO starts at 10. But honestly, youth is less about a number and more about that phase of life where you're stepping into your power and realizing the world needs to hear what you have to say, whatever your age. So, what does the research tell us? Because the story the data tells might surprise you. Nearly half of the world's population is 25 years or younger. That's 3 billion young people, potentially the most influential generation in history. Potentially. Because whether that potential becomes reality depends entirely on whether we build the conditions for it to happen. According to Eurostat, in 2025, young Europeans were engaging civically online at a rate 20% higher than the general population. Online. That's an interesting insight into where the youth are showing up. According to the John Smith Centre's UK Youth Poll 2026, only 25% of young people feel that their generation is treated fairly by the political system, and only 16% feel school has equipped them to make political decisions. And here's where it might get uncomfortable. According to the UK Electoral Commission's 2026 Youth Tracker, family influence is one of the biggest drivers of youth political engagement. When adults at home are civically active, young people follow. But it's not just political involvement. Last year, only 34% of adults in England took part in any form of civic participation. In the US, only 9% say that their community has good turnout in local decision-making. And in Australia, just 7.3% actively participate in civic life. 3 very different countries, the same global truth. Doesn't youth engagement start with us? Because data tells us this is not an apathy problem. 76% of young Americans believe they have the power to make change, but only 40% feel qualified to do so. And according to the John Smith Centre's UK Youth Poll 2026, 73% of young people in the UK took at least one political or community action in the past year. The desire is real, but desire without opportunity, confidence, and trust doesn't show up in the figures. That is a systems problem, and it's a worldwide one. And that's exactly what we want to explore with our guests today. Because knowing what good looks like is one thing. Building it in real communities with real constraints, with real young people is something else entirely. And we have 2 guests who have been doing exactly that work for a very long time. So very quickly, before we dive into our introductions, I just wanted to share a few quotes as ever. The former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan said, "No one is born a good citizen. No nation is born a democracy. Young people must be included from birth. A society that cuts off from its youth severs its lifeline." Alvin Toffler in The Futurist from 1972. The fact is that society is not running itself nicely because the rest of us need all the energy, brains, imagination, and talent that young people can bring to bear down on our difficulties. For society to attempt to solve its desperate problems without the full participation of even very young people is imbecile. And Rachel Jackson in the youth justice campaign, Books Not Bars. Our youth are not failing the system is failing our youth. Ironically, the very youth who are being treated the worst are the young people who are going to lead us out of this nightmare. And Robert R. F. Kennedy in the Day of Affirmation address from 1966. This world demands the qualities of youth, not a time of life, but a state of mind, a temper of the will, a quality of imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of the appetite for adventure over the love of ease. And finally, Malala, who we all know, speech at the United Nations in July 2013. I raise my voice, not so that I can shout, but so that those without a voice can be heard. And on that note, I'll pass to you, Jenny, to introduce our guest, please.
Thank you, Penny. So you and I have both kind of found ourselves working with youth and engaging them and engaging with them. But actually, it's what we're realizing is it's taking more than just sort of being close to them and the proximity to really know what they want. And it's those opportunities to hear them. And so I'm so glad to have these guests today to share their experience of many more years than we have so far, but to really understand better what's needed. So firstly, we're joined by Abbee McLatchie, who's the Deputy CEO of the National Youth Agency in England, a joint negotiating committee, a qualified youth and community worker, and holds a Master in Science in Gender, Policy and Inequalities. Throughout her career, she has worked across everything from alternative education to social care, with a consistent focus on advocacy for underserved communities, refugees, those experiencing homelessness, and the survivors of violence against women and girls. She also brings an international dimension to her work through consultancy with the Commonwealth Secretariat. At the heart of everything Abbee does is a passionate belief in the power of informal education to genuinely change lives and communities. And we're also joined by Stepczak, a community engagement specialist and co-facilitator of Start Something Good, a social innovation initiative bringing communities and services together to co-design solutions to local and social challenges. With over 20 years of experience in youth and community work across Wales and beyond, Paul specialises in community engagement, co-production and creating spaces where people feel heard, valued and genuinely involved in shaping change. So let's get the conversation started, Penny.
Great. I'd love to turn to Abbee first today. Good morning, Abbee. Lovely to have you here with us.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
I would love to ask a little bit about your experience with youth. You've got quite a lot of experience under your belt. When it comes to youth engagement, it's often the young people from the marginalised communities, those in care with disabilities, from lower income backgrounds who are the least represented, I suppose, in engagement spaces. What needs to change structurally to reach them, really?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think there's a few different facets and lenses that you can put on this. So one of the really interesting things that's happening in England at the moment is that we've had our first national youth strategy in about 15 years. It was published in December. And I think the best thing about this for me is that it is absolutely the first national youth strategy that has been fully informed and shaped by young people, and young people from all different backgrounds, all different communities, and is definitely far more considerate and cognizant of the needs of underserved communities. So this national youth strategy this time consulted with a minimum of 14,000 young people. It was actually probably nearer 30,000, but they can only say categorically 14,000 in terms of the way that you have to count the numbers, right? And they did this consultation in a really, really youth work way. So they, rather than expecting young people to just fill in a survey or turn up to where adults normally hold spaces, they went out to young people through trusted adults, through the relationships that they already had, to speak to them where they're at. So, for example, I know that as part of the consultation, they went into the secure estate. And so they were working with young people that were actually in custody to say, hey, this strategy also is for you. You are young people today and citizens of the future. So what do you want and what do you need and what do you think are the changes that we need to make for and with you. And I think one of the other key parts of that is they took those voices, they've used it to co-design a strategy with young people. But most interestingly is it will be young people that measure how successful the implementation of this strategy is. So there's going to be an annual hearing every year with really diverse methodologies to engage with young people and to ensure that those voices are not only heard in every place and space, but are actively involved in that. The language that they use in the national strategy is from excluded to empowered. And so it's very much moving beyond just how we design things with young people, but also to young people being empowered to hold the pen and own future decision making and hold us adults in positions of power to account for how we make sure that happens. So I guess to answer your question, I think we need to see more of that. So we need to see much more moving out of the way, making spaces for young people to come alongside us from national to local and international, but in a way that goes to spaces that young people are in and uses the language and the methodologies of engagement that young people want, rather than trying to create a one-size-fits-all approach that quite frankly has never worked. So I'm excited to see how we can apply this more broadly moving forward, especially in different policy spaces.
Yeah, I mean, it's so exciting. There's stuff changing. We definitely are feeling it, you know, in what we're doing. But how do we have the youth included more and sustainably keep consulting them and getting them involved? How are we training them? How are we offering them the tools? Is that something as well that's a big part of the puzzle? How do they articulate themselves? What kind of support is offered there? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about it is that we're seeing a real shift to inclusion and accessibility as a starting point rather than an add-on. So what we might have seen historically is where it's like, oh, we have this method of engaging with young people. Oh, now we also need to think about, well, what does that mean for young people for whom English is a second language, or who are using alternative communication languages like Makaton? Now we're seeing a shift to how do we build that in from the start? And so when it comes to how we support young people to engage, we're thinking more about building that into the approach from the very beginning. There's something also about recognising that there are incredibly brilliant people working in communities with young people every day in every place. And so we don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel with this. What we need to do is go, hey, who's there? So with young people in the secure estate, as an example, there's brilliant youth and community practitioners working in those spaces that really know their young people well. And so there's something about how we work through and with those trusted adults to change our approach. So rather than needing to provide lots of extra support for young people, it's about changing the way we engage with them in the first place. Because if we do that, all young people will always have a space and will always have an opportunity to be heard and included. So I think that's key for me.
That's really important and interesting to hear, Abbee, because it's actually putting that focus, like you say, on the people that are already working. Like Penny and I often say that there's the values often not given to, or these community workers, particularly with youth as well, but that goes across across health and everything, the sort of service providers, but they exist and those infrastructures are there, and if we can equip those trusted adults and the adults in that space with what they need to do or what they can do to empower the young people. And hearing you say about the empowerment as well just made me reflect on, the podcast's title, and my assumptions of it is around youth engagement and how I opened it a little bit. And it's more than just communication. It's given them the ability to participate and willingly with independence and autonomy, and that's so there's so many layers to that and skills that you need to build, and they come from so many influential contacts that any young person might have, be it a service provider in a specialist need, or education, or another adult in their life, of family. It's so broad, and I think there's a responsibility for us adults to equip them. And I think Penny and I, we we think we try, you know, you think, oh, we'll create this youth space, we'll get a youth space and we'll create it with what they want, and the kids know what they want. We're giving them that voice, but we've actually been surprised when we're like, well, you can do it, and that's almost where they stall, because they don't maybe, I don't know the answer, the conclusion, but maybe they don't believe in themselves. Maybe they don't really believe us that they can just do what they want, that they can stand behind that tuck shop and run it and, you know, ask people for money for a can of Coke, you know, and it's that's where it comes back to our role to empower them and to, you know, put the action on them, but in a way that they feel comfortable with and they can shape themselves.
And for young people to be able to see that when they're so they're not just heard, but they're actually listened to. There's something incredibly powerful in that. What we've seen time and time again is consultation for consultation's sake that doesn't actually create any change. And that's for young people, but also for me as an adult. I know that in my own life. And so there's something about young people being able to see and feel the power that they hold, and then to be able to step into that power and own it. Really, really interesting example of that, I think. There's two parts to this, actually. So there's a brilliant organisation called the I Will movement, which is a social action movement that's led by young people, entirely led by young people. And they held the pen for a lot of the consultation for the youth strategy. So that was young people working with other young people to bring the voices of young people to the table. So there's something different there, isn't there? Like, we've not just created a space, but actually we've got out of the way. And those young people can see the difference that they've made because it's there boldly in the strategy. But then there's also another really interesting lens to this, which is an organisation that was established to contribute towards the Votes at 16 campaign. So it's a youth-led organisation called My Life, My Say. And in the lead up to the last general elections, they did this incredible social movement to try and increase young people. So at the time, young people 18 and above, but to get young people interested in voting, because as we've said, like, there's a lot of voices that aren't in that space. It's often dependent if your family perhaps are engaged in democratic processes, you might be more likely to be, or if you've got a role model that's interested. And My Life, My Say basically did this incredible campaign where they were like, where are young people? And you said at the start, Penny, about online. So it's like, okay, what's the role of online spaces in how we engage with young people? But also, who are the role models and influences in young people's lives? And so there was loads of celebrities and sports people, and all of these people got on board with what My Life, My Say were doing. And in a single day, they had the biggest increase in voter registration in 18 to 35-year-olds than we've ever seen in this country at all. Like, so powerful, the difference that made. They were also a really key part of the most recent push to get Votes at 16 through, which is obviously new to England, but not new to our sort of sister nations. And yeah, we're still seeing pushback on the way that they approach things. So I don't know if you've seen, but in the press recently, sort of in the past 2 weeks here in the UK, there's been a lot of talk about how the Department for Education have used Gemma Collins, who's like a sort of social media star and a TV star, to engage with young people. And people have gone, well, why are you doing that? What's Gemma Collins got to do with education? And there's been a bit of a tension and a bit of a pushback in why would you choose somebody like that, quote unquote. And actually, like, for lots of young people, she's really cool. They engage with her content. They're already engaging with those approaches. And so I think that what I'm seeing is we've learned a lot from people like My Life, My Say in the policy space to go, hey, how are we better using what's important to young people to show young people that there's more than one way to be heard and there's more than one way to have power and a voice. And I think it's brilliant. I think I want to see more of that.
We're often pondering on sort of youth involvement and how to get our youth, I suppose, motivated to potentially join a panel or give some of their time, I suppose. And I guess the question I wanted to really put to you is, do you think it's about incentivization? Of course, you know, you can have food and drink or whatever else, but is it something that we should be saying the youth deserve to have a salary, they need to have that time monetized that they have? Are there other ways of doing it? And like, what I'm always thinking about is what is that driving factor? What fires them up to want to be a part of that, right? And I think part of that might well be that we're now trying to say you're seeing it through to the end and you'll see the results that are coming out. But what is your thoughts sort of around all that?
Yeah, so I think, again, it's multifaceted. For me, I think if we're asking young people, if we're consulting with young people, if we're asking young people for their expertise on something, they should be recompensed for that. Like, you don't go to work for nothing. And so why should we expect other people to give their expertise freely? We wouldn't expect it of lots of other people. So I think there's definitely something about recognising the equitable value that young people's contribution should have. I think there's something about young people being able to believe and see the tangible benefit of that involvement. So like you said there, Penny, what does this mean in the end? What's the tangible change that I'm able to make? But there's also something about helping young people to recognise the value of it for them. So what will this do for me? What do I get out of it? What does it do for me in terms of my beliefs and my values, but also my skills and what I'm able to then bring into my future life? You know, this morning here in England, we had the first stage of the report by Alan Milburn and sort of youth and employment today. You know, there's some real interesting synchronicities that will come in the next phase of his report, I think, that connects empowerment, engagement, activities, and the skills that brings to young people for their future. And I think there's something about how we articulate that well with young people. But then I also think there's something about young people being able to see that they actually have a vested interest in the future. They have a vested interest in the power that they're given, and that they equally have citizenship to adults. Like, this is their community, this is their local authority, this is their council, this is their government. And so them feeling like they have an equal stake in decisions that are made, and really believing that, is really key to helping them to see why they should be heard and why they should take part.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking that maybe it starts earlier, more deliberately in education, that we sort of start giving that sort of space for listening to each other's opinions and discussing things, and starting that from the ground up, really. So it becomes kind of normalized, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. We do still have a bit of a challenge with the traditional education, formal education system, particularly, you know, particularly here. We're not necessarily particularly comfortable at power sharing with young people. We might give people two choices, but there's not really a choice. We might say that we want to consult on uniform, but only within the boundaries of it still being a skirt and trousers and a shirt and a tie. We're not particularly skilled at equipping young people with that understanding. But I think it's not just about formal education. I think it's about informal education and community education, and it's about families, and it's about informal spaces. And I think we need to change the culture across the board, because we all benefit if we do this well, right? You know, we all are co-citizens in this world, and therefore we all should have a role to play in changing things for the better, for us and for young people.
And I find, I'm just going to add devil's advocate, but coming up with like AI and internet and all the rest of it, it is like one of the first, or maybe it's not one of the first times, but it's a unique situation now where actually we can't be the adults who say we know best anymore, because we don't know about some things that they know more about than we do.
100%.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting yesterday and I couldn't work out how to turn the TV on to do my presentation, and the first thing that I said was, oh, I wish I was at home so that my boys could show me how to do this, right?
Isn't that lovely though, as well?
Yeah,
that you feel like, I need to ask you for your help. Well, amazing.
Yeah.
Paul, I'd love to turn to you now. Good morning.
Good morning.
So you're doing a lot of this sort of co-design, and what I wanted to ask you really, what are the biggest barriers that organizations face when they're trying to really get young people to engage and come into the room, but really like properly involving them?
I think the barriers are universal, usually, regardless if it's young people or whether it's marginalized communities. And it's kind of, for me, usually about 6 themes. The first one being engagement via proxy. So we need to get as close to the source as possible. The example I used to give is that I used to ask my youth workers team, coming about April, May, what do the young people want to do this summer? And they would tell me one thing. And a couple of weeks later, I'd sneak into the youth club and I'd sit with the young people and say, what do you want to do this summer? And it wasn't the same as one of my youth workers. And my youth workers are with them a lot, more than their parents a lot of the time. And if they can't tell me what they want, which is correct. So for me, it's about with organizations is that we'll go to this youth organization, ask them for the voice of the people, but really they need to get those young people and speak to those face to face. Another one is problem with power. We talked a lot here about empowerment. Empowerment, the word sits a little bit difficult with me because it usually means that someone's got to give power, where I want to see the young people find their own power. So it's not given to them, it's for them to find in themselves and their own voice. Because when you've got power, you've got control. And that's the other thing when I've seen programs come and go where they say, we empower these people, but the empowerment was on a leash. It could be retracted whenever they want. So it's difficult. The larger the institution, this is the culture they've come to. And Clayton Christensen is like the godfather of innovation. And like he says that big organizations can't innovate because they've grown this culture and this size. You need to be small and agile. And I still feel that with any organization, with anything that it needs to do with genuine co-production and working with people, it needs to be in like small agile teams, if you like. So yeah, it's about power and letting go of that power and letting go of control. And the bigger the institution, the harder I find that is. There's the understanding of environment. So like you said, you've got your own space and the young people believe that's their space, where I see a lot of organizations saying, you need to come and meet us on our turf. And in this university setting, I've got community members. Well, I've done this in the past. I've tried to take community members just to a simple meeting in a university premises or in the local council premises. They will not go. We need to be on their territory where they feel safe to get the best information out of them. All of this is down to one word, and that's trust. And it's building trust. And for trust, you need to build relationships. And that doesn't happen from a tick box. And that doesn't happen from a single interaction. That happens over time. So and then when we've got these organizations, they're time starved. So it's trying to find a way how they can have that balance. So they build up relationships. I think the other point would be consequence. As Abbee just said, no one wants to fill in a survey and then you find out that nothing ever happens. There needs to be something that is a consequence of any interaction or of any engagement. And if there isn't going to be, they just need to know in advance that, we never do huge systemic change overnight. Everything happens in small steps. So we just need to be realistic with whoever we're talking to, that the whole system's not going to change overnight, but we're going to try and do small steps. Some people call them quick wins, but I'd like them to give it a bit more reality and integrity than that. But people need to see something moving because of their interaction. So, because if they don't, then what's the point? You've wasted my time and nothing's happened, so I won't do it again. And that's another thing that we're fighting against at the moment, the people that have been over, death by consultation with no results. So what they're going to do, even going into their adulthood, they're not going to engage any further. I think the last one is, and it's really sad to see, is this hierarchy where people undervalue other people, either for their age or for from where they come from, if you like. I'm a big believer in strengths and helping people find their strengths, and I'm a great believer in pointing that out as well. So the events that I deliver. We work in diverse teams, so whenever there's a problem where everyone has got some skin in the game to try and resolve that problem, we break everyone up into diverse teams and everyone is equal. And we kind of try and reinforce that. So to give an example, I did an event a couple of weeks ago on building a community wing on the end of a school. And so invited to that event were all the people which have got a vested interest. So you had people from education, teachers, representatives from the local authority. You had people from, the school is right next to a hospital, so we had doctors there, and we had community health workers. We had this, directors from construction companies which are building this thing. We had politicians in the room, but then we had a lot of young people in the room as well. So we had 14 to 16-year-olds, but they were all broken up into teams. So every team is completely diverse, and we need to ensure that we've got an equal playing field. So number one, we made everyone wear a lanyard. They had to take all off their official lanyards, and they had to wear one lanyard which said what their first name is and what their first job was. And that put everyone on an equal playing field. So the director from the construction company was now Derek McDonald's, which put him exactly on the same level as the young person who's also Sandra McDonald's. And that gets them talking. And what we would need to do is get people talking as people, not as their roles, if you like. But when you create that safe space for them to do so, and you have that thing that you can help them find things in common with, like their first job, etc., that's when the magic starts to happen. Relationship starts building, and you find that, or they find that these young people have got incredible strengths. Of that table, who has got the Netflix with the other young people in that community? The young person. Then the other people start thinking, actually, when this is going to be built, this is going to be built for the next generation. So they all start to turn to the young person to say, what does this need to look like? And then that gives that young person a sense of power. Also, being in Wales, we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So any service needs to be able to follow that and to say that it kind of meets the need for local generations. So whenever we have done one of these events and we have youth, we privileged to have young people in the room. They're not just an add-on, they actually become a little bit of the focus in some sense, because people need to be able to involve them to meet legislation as well. So yeah, it's about trying to find people, help young people recognizing their strengths. And when they recognize their strengths, they have the confidence to come forward, and they can change the dynamic incredibly. I'll give you one last example. I did one of these events, and because it was COVID, I did them online, and I was able to go into these different rooms, chat rooms, and see the different teams talking. And it was just one of the conversations which was so simple, but just blew me away. It was about climate change, I think, and there was a civil servant, a teacher, a community worker, and a young person in the room. And the young person said, well, why don't we do this? And the civil servant said, well, we've always done it that way. That's the way things are done. And then the young person went, but why? And he never thought of why. And it is quite a silly, stupid rule. And then you had the other people chipping in to say, but the world has changed, and the world is constantly changing. So why are we still doing something which you don't even know why we're doing? And it was just that light bulb moment of the young person came with some really good naivety, really, to be able to say, actually, we need to change. And that person sitting down there, a civil servant who's been in that job for X amount of years, saying, yeah, you're right in this conversation here. So you have all those light bulb moments as well. So, it's about getting those organizations. I've gone around on a long journey here, but it is about ensuring those young people have an equal voice and they are recognized as equals at each of those tables and in the discussion.
And would you also say, Paul, that sometimes in certain contexts, the youth are also understanding better an obstacle or a hurdle that they might not have done previously from hearing then from the adults in the room as well? Or is that more of a rarity? I'm just curious if it works reciprocally.
There's two sides, really. There's one, the young people or any community member will hold this tacit knowledge of their communities and their lifestyle that the other people will never find from a report, or will never understand. That on the other side is we have young people which don't understand the system. So when we have this dialogue of sharing insights, they may say, well, why can't we do this? But they don't realize this wrapped up in red tape, etc. So then that there's a mutual sharing of information between both parties, but then sometimes you have that little surprise to say, why do we do that? And the person, I don't know, it's just always been done that way. And that gets that person thinking then, and hopefully that inspires that thing which I hope for, is those two people saying, can we pick this up after this session? Because, and to go away and think about it longer. Because for me, growing up, I was, my parents had a good job. I never went without, but I did grow up in a socially deprived area. And I never felt that we had a voice as young people. We didn't even have a voice as community members. And it was only when I went away and we realised that we are a socially deprived community, and actually services do kind of treat us in a different way. When I got to that community as a community worker, I realised no one calls the police because there's no point. They don't come anymore. But then because that happens, there's no crime rate, so there's no need to send police. So it becomes a cycle, I feel like. So it's just a matter of I've lost my train of thought now. I will be completely honest. But it is all about having that mutual understanding, and you can only get that from that dialogue between both parties to unpack all these these assumptions that they've been holding for so long.
And it's
go on, Jenny.
It's understanding the context, isn't it? People's jobs and roles in societies and experiences, and that all ladders up to the perspective that they can share and exchange. But what really pulled through from what you're saying for me, Paul, is about that environment. Unless the environments aren't right or created, okay, we can say space or whatever, but there's so many elements to that. Penny and I, we have created a space, but I do think from when you said it that the young people think, do they think it's truly theirs? Because we have to open it up. What else do they need to sort of have that kind of permission and belief, and understand why maybe they can't use it whenever they want, and that goes back to what I said about the context, and you've got to continue to share your experiences, and that otherwise people won't fully understand why things are done or what they need to be done. Abbee, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to build on what Paul was saying, because I absolutely agree with all of the points he made. And I think the thing that answers like some of your thoughts and concerns about this stuff is what has to be there is absolute trust. And that's why it's so important that it's trusted people in trusted communities, or when you are new to opening a space or new to a relationship with young people, to recognise that it takes time. And that's why empowerment and consultation and true youth leadership and youth power is really are two completely different things, because what somebody will put on a survey, for example, is really different to what they will talk to you about and the conversations that you will have once they really know that they can trust your agenda and what you are bringing to that reciprocal relationship with them. So for me, one of the key things to really successful power sharing with young people is time. Like, you have to build the time into this. It can't just be, we've got a week to consult on that building being put up, or, what do you want on your tuck shop this term, young people? Like, if the time isn't there, the trust and relationship won't be there. And then you might get some people's opinions, but you're never really going to move to a place of truly youth-led or truly youth-informed and youth-empowered. And that, for me, is key, really.
And I love the example that Paul just gave about the school adding the community space to the end of it, because that just for me is genius in many ways. Like, of course, we've got the situation that our kids don't want to have their space associated with the school because it's not cool or whatever. But I do love the idea of facilitating that connection and then having a way that the community also has a step inside into the school's potential. I know that's a difficult area, and we talk about safe space and everything, but it doesn't just shut at the school gates, does it? And how do we enable that? And that was a really nice example.
I think it's all about this local tacit knowledge that you need to pick up on, really, which you can only get, like I say, you wouldn't get that from a survey. It's like, I have been there with my own youth club. They wanted it to move into the school. My young people didn't want to go back into school. Yeah. So it was best in my situation that I kept it as a completely different entity. But in certain communities, it's a different story. So it's about having that deep dialogue with those young people to find out what they understand. If, like I say, if they have a bad experience in school, perhaps they don't want to go anywhere near the vicinities. It's just about, and like I said, this all comes down to, like I said, relationships, trust, dialogue over the time. You know, we can just look at what does it mean to be trusted, and that will take a lot of the. I don't want to talk about ticking boxes, but what comes from, you know, how to build trust is basically a platform for how to build solid engagement.
And I wanted to ask sort of both of you, what kind of things would you like to see in the next 5 years happening in the space for youth engagement, and your role in making that happen, really?
Oh, interesting. So I can speak from an England perspective. I have an international lens, but from an England perspective, really. And I think there's something for me about the infrastructure around this work. Like, there are places and people that are doing it brilliantly. So how do we bring that knowledge to a broader subset of people so that everybody gets a really good experience of this? So there's something about like a recognition of the need for infrastructure to support really great youth empowerment. I don't know if this is a want, but I'm really curious to see how this strategy progresses in terms of how young people really are given the space to truly assess the impact of it. I would like to see, I mean, I'm always going to advocate for this generally, but there's definitely something for me about multi-year funding from all funders, because actually, how on earth is Paul's youth workers supposed to build a sustained, trusting, long-term relationship with young people if he's only got 3 months worth of funding for youth workers that can only do 5 hours a week? You know, so there's
time, doesn't it?
So there's something about understanding the practice and pedagogy that needs to happen that requires proper valuing, and that needs to be multi-year funding, and it needs to be sustainable. And I would really like to see as well, like, young people being at the helm for some of that decision making about what, you know, we've got 14,000 young people, 14,000 voices of young people in a State of the Nation report for England only, that clearly articulates what it is that young people want and need from their communities and from society and for the future. What are we going to do with that? How are we going to really support young people to bring that to life? They would be the things for me. I don't know if Paul's got a different view.
So before you contribute, Paul, I'm really glad you said that at the end, because I wanted to ask, and you know, maybe you've already addressed it, but if there's anything more you want to say, like how you know, this consultation was done, the strategy is there, which is hopeful, but does it almost get to the, could it be perceived as that it's taken now out of the hands of the young people in terms of the action and the delivery? And yes, there'll be the review and the monitoring, but, and maybe it's another discussion, I don't want to open a can of worms, but you know, how do we, you know, have faith, have belief, or you know, how is this really successfully implemented? And you know, you touched on it by saying that young people need to be behind the sort of decisioning and implementation, but is there anything else of that? Because that has been bubbling in my mind since you opened with it.
Well, I literally was in a call about that before I came to this podcast, so so I can say I trust, but that's easy for me to say, right? Because I'm in their space and having those conversations. But I think there's a few things that are in place that allow us to have a little bit of confidence in that. One is there's a youth advisory board, and that youth advisory board are still engaged, so they're still shaping, they're still leading. The strategy got launched, but then the government funded the I Will movement, so youth-led social action. So those young people are hosting a series of activities around the country, along with Hope Hacks, and Paul talks about hacks and hackathons as a model. And we have a group of another youth-led organisation that does that. Those people are still heavily engaged, heavily influencing, heavily having a voice in what's happening. And I think the other way to have a bit of confidence is I'm seeing a shift in the policy space. So last week, again, from an England context, there's a consultation on whether we should have a social media ban for young people. And historically, what they might have done is perhaps done a few surveys in schools at a push. You know, they might have asked a few selected young people their views. But actually what we've seen is that government department's spoken to our government department and gone, God, how did you engage with all those young people? How did you really have their voices in this consultation? And again, we've seen the I Will movement do a whole suite of engagement with young people in communities on that. We've hosted some roundtables for the department directly with young people. And last week I took a group of young people into number 10, where they literally sat with Keir Starmer for an hour telling him their own views and opinions on what should happen. So I think I'm quietly optimistic that I'm seeing a shift, rather than just in the places that we always see it, but we're starting to see a bigger shift. The challenge with that is how well it gets sustained and how well that momentum keeps up, and whether there's enough funding and structural support to allow it to really happen at every level, rather than just in the big ticket items that are really important to government today.
And thank you, Abbee. I really appreciate, your insight and the sort of practical, perspective that you're sharing as well, like being, involved as well, because not everyone has the opportunity to hear this. So I hope our listeners will value that. Thank you. And Paul, sorry, I interrupted. What would you like to see happen in the youth engagement space?
Some good things are already happening. So we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales, and there's an academy for younger people as well. We've got I do quite a bit of work with the Ashoka. So they've got their social change making agenda, which is great. And we've done a couple of joint events with them. I've also done a couple of events with Atlantic College. It's a private school, but all of those people in that college are going through the motions to be social change makers. And for me, I would love to see something like that go mainstream. So as part of the curriculum, I know the curriculum is busting at the seams, but to give people, we've taken a phrase from a lady called Pappy Thornton, but whenever we work with young people, we say, apprentice yourselves to social change or to something. Whether you're going to be going to the corporate world of construction or banking, whatever, have a social conscious about you and you can change the world. So if we have enough people, so if we had, in the mainstream curriculum, something about being social change makers, that would be absolutely fantastic. What do we need? I believe we need more funding for more youth work to take place, to people to actually take it a lot more seriously, I think, than it is, because I know when I was a youth worker, the funding got cut considerably at one particular time, which, like Abbee says, there wasn't enough time to actually spend enough time with young people to build up these relationships, the confidence, the trust, and help them recognize their strengths. And, it's very short-term thinking, in my personal opinion, because when people say there's going to be social problems later down the line, well, we were kind of acting as surrogate parents in socially deprived communities to some of these young people. They had nowhere else to go, and we were training them in general behavioural studies and helping them problem solve, just basic transferable skills, which when you take out the youth element, I don't know where those skills were going to be picked up anywhere else. Certainly not by the school, and that's not a negative thing. They've got a curriculum to develop and deliver. So I think youth work needs to be taken a lot more seriously, put a lot more money into it, so to ensure that we have a longer term view of how those people turn out to be much better citizens, and that give them the best chance in life. And for me personally, yes, we have young people turning up at our events, but I like to see more of it. I like to see more young people involved as equals at the tables to design services, co-design services, because I still see that proxy invitation. Well, why don't we just invite this person from this charity that represents the communities, or that represents the young people? No, we need to go closer to the source, and they need to be there, and people need to recognize that they've got equal strength. They've got an equal part to play, but they've got just as valuable strengths than the other people around the table. So yeah, that's my wish.
And I'm also thinking about the adults as well. Like, how as well do we reflect more or learn ourselves about what it means to actually really listen to the young person, to their opinions? How do we, I was looking at courses for co-design. I don't know if I'm wrong, I'm looking in the wrong places, but it's really hard to find courses for adults. There's quite a bit out there for the youth to get involved into that space. But as an adult, to understand, as a youth worker or anyone who's interested in doing anything with the youth, to have that knowledge. And it's not just owned. You don't know that stuff. You need to learn about it. How can we also, I'd love to see that in the next 5 years. There's more of awareness of let's make the space for it and make that possible.
One of the things Martin, who I deliver the hats with, one of the things that we were thinking of is we've done 87 of these events. We're now coming up to our 100th, and we were thinking of possibly creating some form of, when we hit our 100, I think that gives us enough experience and kudos to be able to say we can start like some form of training program. So that's kind of on the back burner in a bit of
I'm signing up.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was started as a part of an accident. Someone asked Martin to deliver an event and said, oh, by the way, can you do it as a hackathon? And he had to learn overnight and deliver this event. And then we got put together during COVID because both of us had children during COVID time, and we were the only two going back to the office. So I brought in my community development, my co-production, said, why don't we do it for this and why do that? And then people started to ask, as we were going along, can this solve this problem? And basically what we found is that we've got this vehicle, which is just simply, convening people to come together to fix social problems. And so we've learned more about co-design and as we've gone along, basically, but a lot of it is by practice, by seeing what's working and not working. So, but yeah, hopefully there'll be something in the future on that.
Yeah, you used the word practice, Paul, as well. And I think that's, to Penny's point about, adults, it's like we all, I'm going to go a bit abstract here, but we all talk about wellness practice and everything, but actually it's that, Paul, you said you'd like to see people having this, social, impact and change interest. And I think adults have that, we can raise that awareness for our children, for the children that we are involved with or influence, even if that's our friends' kids, around, the topics we talk about, what we put value on, what we draw their attention to. And yes, there could be political, environmental, angles to it, but ultimately like where you can have that wider influence, and I think that should become a practice, and we need to inspire people to practice in that way, because we can all sit and moan about the local council, the government, the state of the environment, what people aren't doing, but we're the only ones in control of what we do. So I think that's a really like idealistic wish, but I think it's something that we hopefully can inspire people.
Small steps, right? So our Tween Talk question today is, we're told our generation is the future, but the future feels really far away. Is there any point doing anything now, that links in quite nicely, when it feels like nobody actually cares what we think? Abbee, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really sad when I hear that, right? Because it's like, how are the adults in positions of power around that, or those young people that wrote that question? What are their behaviours and practices that have led for that young person to feel like that? Like, that's just really sad, isn't it? So I think for me, there's something about like holding space for that young person focusing in on that young person, holding space for that young person to be heard. So I'd want to understand, like, what does that mean for you? What is it? Where are you not heard? What does that feel like? What's the impact of that for you? But then I'd also want to create the opportunity for those young people to be able to see all the spaces where they can be, or where they can have influence and have power, because it's incremental beliefs, isn't it? You don't just get in a car one day and you can drive it. You know, you practice, you learn, you try different things out. And I think there's something about young people having as many opportunities as possible to exercise their experience of power and autonomy in their own lives and their communities and environments. So I think there'd be something about, how do we show that young person all of the brilliant places where young people have made a difference? Now, whether that's, huge internationally platformed young people like Malala, or, whether it's somebody like Dan that set on My Life, My Say, or, Yaya, who runs, the Hope Hacks and the Hope Collective. And I'd want that young person, or I'd want to create the opportunity for that young person to be able to speak to those young people and see, like, just how precious and important they are in the bigger society. I think it's incumbent on us to do that, though. I think a lot of the time we just kind of like, I still hear language, I'm sure Paul still hears it as well, about like, oh, but those young people are hard to reach. And the report that's come out today is amazing, the Milburn report, but it still talks about neats and labels, and like, it's just a young person, right? There's not a different subspecies of human that has those characteristics. So for me, there's something about how we change and how adults and societies change in order to show that young person a different way of being. And I guess what I would say to them is, come on, let's go and have a cuppa. Should we go and have a cuppa? Where do you like to go? Let's sit and have a chat about it. And then let's start from where they're at, in a place that they want to be, and then help them to see the world of opportunities that are there for them. Yeah. Very idealistic, I appreciate, but that's the only way.
It's where true learning comes from as well, as you have a challenge, or you have a limitation and you push past it, and often you need someone there, be it a practitioner, a specialist, and expertise to help you with that.
Absolutely.
I was having a conversation with my 12-year-old yesterday, and she was telling me how Gen Alpha doesn't get heard, and they're the ones that are just seen as the brain rot. They've got nothing to add to the conversation, that they're just sort of stamped out. And again, it was sort of a fascinating conversation. So I don't want to get too deep into that, but I was just thinking along on the lines of that, right? And having to have those conversations and go, well, you can be the one who makes the change, make people hear what you're all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust yourself, trust that you have intrinsic value and that you have something important to say, and that, you have the power to make people listen.
Gen Alpha story is by no means written yet, right?
Yeah, absolutely that. Absolutely.
Yeah, Paul, what about you?
Let's break that question down. I don't think it is that far away. In Wales, you can vote at the age of 16, and we've got a Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And I think the world moves more quickly now than it ever has before. Look at what happened over the last 5 years. It's just, we haven't had 5 years that have had so much happening and has moved that fast ever. And so I think things are moving more quickly. Let's jump to the end. I care. There are lots of people out there that care. And is there point in doing anything now? I'll go to a story we were doing one of our events in Wrexham, and it was about the UK government originally, before Pride and Place, gave a couple of communities or town centres £20 million to improve themselves. And Wrexham was one of those. And in that room, we had 128 people, nicely mixed up with young people, business people, politicians, people from the football club, people from the local community, all working in these diverse teams. Every table had at least 2 young people on that table. And what has come out from that event is people stood up in that event, businessmen stood up in that event saying, if you're going to spend £20 million in this community, this is not going to affect me. This is going to affect this young person by here. So we got to think about this young person. And that kind of resonated throughout the whole of the conversation. This was in front of everyone. They got everyone kind of thinking there. And a year on, we've been told that what they are putting in for that application for that 20 million is all youth focus, sorry. So if those young people weren't in that room having that discussion, I don't know if that would have happened. So it's about, the message to those young people is get in those spaces, and for those organizations to say, these are the next generation. Whatever you do today is going to affect the next generation. So you'd be quite naive not to involve them in that conversation. So they need to be here. And when they do get them at that table, they will recognize the qualities and the strengths and the expertise that they are bringing that they would never be able to pick up on any survey or any tick box focus exercise.
So get out there.
Yeah.
It's okay to ask for help if you don't know how, and the person you turn to might not know, but they might be able to ask someone else. And we've got the wonderful AI assistant, got research things that it's, you don't have to have the answers as well. I think it's quite important to say you might not even be able to be pointed in the right direction, but if you've got the passion or the interest, you should pursue it.
And I think it's important to note that in all 4 nations, there's sort of national youth work organisations. So we're the professional body, which is one thing, but actually there's like brilliant membership organisations, youth, young people led organisations, like Google Youth Work. In any country that you're in, you are going to find people that this is absolutely their bread and butter, and they will move heaven and earth to make sure that there is somebody available for you to help you and move things on. It's for me that's really key. Because if it's not for people like Paul making sure that young people are in those rooms, there's something about the advocacy that youth and community workers bring, right? And we're probably the best and most well-equipped people who will always go, have you got a young person coming to that? How have you engaged with young people before asking me what I think young people think on this thing? So Google Youth Work, get involved.
Yeah, and it's like there's so many exciting opportunities that are actually out there, and that makes me wish I was back to being 12 again. So there you go.
Well, you can always come and be a youth worker, Penny.
Yeah. Thank you so much today to our guests, Paul and Abbee, for sharing their insights with us. And thank you to you, our listeners, for giving us your time and attention. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might appreciate it, especially with a young person in your life or someone who works alongside them. And if today has prompted anything, let it be this. Next time you're making a decision that affects a young person, ask them first. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review. It helps more people find these conversations. We're Penny and Jenny, and this has been Perspectives from the Informed Perspective. Keep noticing, keep listening, and stay curious about the world around you. Until the next time, keep informing those perspectives.